Well, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow's vote on PNR is the culmination of some 5 years' work in this Parliament. I think it must be one of the longest periods of time of work on any particular measure. Certainly it's taken at least 5 years off my life, but it has been a very important and interesting process. It certainly hasn't been an easy process, and I understand fully that from the outset this has always been a controversial piece of legislation. But it's one that all EU governments, and indeed the United States government, have requested as a very important tool for tackling terrorism, trafficking, and organized crime. For those of you, I'm sure there's probably no one here who hasn't been following the issue, but basically PNR information is the very basic information that you hand over when you book a flight. A name, passport number, phone number, etc. By collecting and processing that data, intelligence agencies are able to build up what are called patterns of behavior that identify suspicious actions that can be followed up then by authorities. And because we're looking for these patterns of behavior, I would stress that we're not seeking to profile individuals on the basis of that data, but to look just at those patterns. With the help of PNR, it has been possible to identify the routes used by criminals and terrorists and prevent individuals from reaching their intended destinations or targets. However, without a PNR directive across the whole of the EU, in every member state, there are gaps in tracing those individuals leaving and entering our countries. The proposal on this directive, as I said, was made some 5 years ago. It was rejected by the Civil Liberties Committee in 2013, and since then I have been working to ensure that the concerns of the MEPs at that time have been addressed by putting in place strong safeguards that I believe are proportionate to the risks. PNR is only going to be used for a closed list of serious offences, and it will only be handled by highly trained operatives who know exactly what they're looking for. I've always made it clear that, of course, PNR is not a response to one terror attack, however serious and appalling that attack might be, nor is it a silver bullet, but it's also clear that the proposal is proportionate now, particularly now, to the risks we are facing. PNR is useful for identifying the often circuitous routes that foreign fighters use to return to the EU from places like Syria. However, it's also extremely effective in identifying people traffickers and drug traffickers because of the way data is stored over a period of time, allowing those patterns of behavior that I referred to be monitored. For example, if someone were to regularly take a flight to South Asia, and that person always travels with another person who sits in a different part of an airplane, but on the return flight, there is always a younger person, maybe a girl, sitting beside the man, that would, of course, raise questions that would be followed up by other investigation techniques. So I'm very hopeful of a well-informed debate this afternoon in the Chamber. Unfortunately, I have to say, we have not always seen a high level of debate on this issue. I'm hoping for a positive vote tomorrow. We've taken a long time to come to this point, but I hope we finally may be able to put in place a PNR system that delivers both for saving lives and also for protecting our very vital liberties. Many countries have already received support for creating their own national PNR systems. But of course it is vitally important, and one of the main reasons for us proceeding in this way is to ensure that there are common high standards, both in terms of the use of information, but also in the protection of privacy and liberties, which are followed right across Europe, so we do not end up with the alternative, which of course would have been very much a piecemeal arrangement, with some countries participating with their own standards and their own requirements and their own limitations on those very vital elements. Now, the contents of the report. I'm sure that you've already studied this very carefully, but I'll just highlight, if I may, one or two of these matters, and then I'll be happy to debate with you or answer your questions. First of all, I think it's important to indicate the agreement we reached following our trilogue, which was again quite a difficult one. First of all, the question of retention period. There will be a 5 years retention period of data for both terrorism and serious criminal offences. But after 6 months of that retention or storage, data will be then masked out or anonymised by the authorities. There will also be a specific and closed list of offences that the data can be used to investigate and prosecute in relation to. There is a clear framework of rules for the use of data, including the need for a data protection officer in the relevant law enforcement units, guidance on handling that data, independent oversight and monitoring, and also a clear reference, as you'd expect, to the new EU data protection legislation, which of course is forming part of a wider package that we are debating today and voting on tomorrow. The directive also states that there will be a robust review mechanism of the operations after 2 years. The review would include assessing the need for non-carrier economic operators to be included in the scope, and for all aspects of the directive to be assessed in light of proportionality and necessity, with particular reference, and you may well be aware of the historic legal base here, with particular reference to the requirements of the ECJ Data Retention Directive. And the proportionality and necessity point, which was raised by the ECJ, is a matter which I have spent some considerable amount of time on, where I am trying to make absolutely sure that we comply with what we think could be any challenge in future of a legal nature. This law that we are now moving with must be implemented within 2 years, but EU governments have made it clear that they really do wish to begin operating the system almost immediately, given what they perceive to be a higher level of threat. I'm going to stop at that point, and I'm going to invite your questions and comments, and I may well have some more things that I would like to add in due course. I just want to correct something, by the way. I think I said, didn't I, before anonymisation, it was 6 months. It's 12 months, in fact, not 6 months. I'm sorry about that. My fault. Carry on, please. Sorry.
Imants Vīksne from Latvia, national newspaper, neatkarīgā avīze. Terrorists uses not only planes but also trains and buses, and how is this data collecting?
I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with. I've been dealing for 5 years with what is essentially an aviation-linked process. It would be for others, I think, to judge whether or not, in view of the nature of threats against our people, that there has to be an extension, or that it would be desirable to have an extension of a PNR of some kind into other areas. But that is not what we are dealing with here. What we do know is, with the PNR operations in place, I mean, the UK has a fully operational one, has had for some years, and others have been preparing and putting in place their own. But what we do know so far is that there is a considerable amount of, there has been a considerable amount of work done and success as a result of the use of PNR already, even though it is currently limited and it will be through my proposals, to the aviation field. We are dealing with people who are travelling considerable distances to come to Europe. And yes, it's true. I suppose people can walk to Europe. People can come to Europe in all kinds of different ways. Currently, we think that this is an important ingredient, something we're offering to help with security. But as I said in my earlier remarks, it's not the silver bullet, and it may not be the total end of this process, depending on, of course, how things proceed. But as far as I'm concerned, this is what I was asked to do, and I do think it will be a very valuable contribution.
Thank you. I'm from Bloomberg. Mr. Kirkhope, what is your understanding of the readiness of member states to invoke the intra-EU flight option? That was, in the end, added as an option, but only as an option rather than a requirement. Is it your understanding that most or even all member states will extend the scope to cover intra-EU flights? And secondly, how confident are you that the agreement will be approved tomorrow? How much of a problem does the ALDE amendment that you flagged yesterday pose?
No, of course, the process here, dealing with the second point first, the process here is that, of course, anybody can put an amendment down at any stage. There was an agreement regarding the package, including the data protection stuff. We agreed, actually, or the leaders of our groups agreed, that there would not be amendments. The fact that ALDE have decided to put down this particular amendment, which was well discussed and debated all the way through, and reasoning against it was made, and indeed in the trilogue it was quite clear that it would be unacceptable to Council, unacceptable to the governments, were that to be the basis upon which we proceeded with that in. So I have spoken, I would prefer, of course, ALDE to remove this, to actually withdraw that amendment. But I am reasonably confident at this stage that we are going to get my report through unchanged. And I would just, on the first point you raised about the implementation side of this, I was also involved very, very strongly with the agreements that we've reached with other countries, particularly with the United States, in which we went ahead with a PNR, an EU PNR agreement with the United States, and certainly, so far as I'm aware, that is proving a very useful tool from the point of view of transatlantic relations. I believe that actually, in terms of the use of it now, I think that it's going to be very successful. And you mentioned this issue to me in terms of the intra. Let me put it this way, we would not have been able to make the progress we did with Trilogue had we not included intra. Because although it was not everybody's cup of tea originally, certainly in the case of Germany, Germany had its own concerns about the use of intra. I think that in due course the evidence became very clear indeed from intelligence agencies and other sources that without intra this would not be as effective an instrument. And please remember, in my opening remarks I made to you just a few minutes ago, I told you that in fact much of the terrorist intentions or major criminal intentions are by using subterfuge of one kind or another in terms of travelling. If someone wants to explode a bomb in London, and indeed I have to tell you that we believe that we've thwarted a number of intentions of that kind in the last 18 months using PNR, using UK PNR. If someone wants to do that, what they will probably do, they will enter the EU to a capital city, probably, in a country far away from the UK. They will probably fly to Stockholm. I'm only giving these as hypothetical examples. I can't be quite precise on this, but they will fly to somewhere like Stockholm, and then they will fly from Stockholm to Madrid. And then they may decide to fly from Madrid to Paris, and then from Paris to London. If we don't have intra-information, we're not able to follow or track that pattern. So you can understand that we are much less able to deal with those kind of threats. And there is direct evidence that the indirect approaches or arrivals in Europe is the way in which people are conducting themselves and are likely to do, in our view, in the future as well.
Yes. Ole Ryborg from Danish television. As you are aware, Denmark has derogation in this area because of the Danish opt-out. Could you give me an estimation whether that would have any impact on Denmark in, for example, the fight against foreign fighters and others? Does this have an impact on Denmark, and in your estimation, in what areas, and how would that, what kind of consequences would that have for Denmark being a member of Schengen but not being in the PNR?
Well, of course, the PNR is almost Schengen blind. It is an agreement which is going to apply across the EU as a whole, regardless of membership of Schengen. And that is why the United Kingdom can take such a large role in it, and it intends to do so, and is very enthusiastic about it. But I mean, I respect very much the views of countries that either do want to or don't want to participate. But I have to say, to make it work really well, we do need actually as much take-up as we possibly can. So, I mean, I think that Denmark has made its view clear on JHA matters. We in Britain, of course, as you know, had this Protocol 36 in which we had to opt out of JHA, but then, of course, we were free to opt back in and have indeed opted in to a considerable number of European measures which we believe are enormously helpful, such as the European arrest warrant, for instance, which is proving, I think, to be a very, very useful tool as well. But I fully respect the Danish view on this, and I believe there are people in Denmark too who would like to see PNR, but would like to see PNR even wider than the EU. I think they would like to see other countries that are not currently members of the EU, such as Switzerland and others, joining in. That's not a matter for today or for me, to be blunt with you. I respect the views of individual countries and what they decide, and that opt-out, which was part of, I think, the referendum in Denmark, is also something that I respect.